Welcome back. Another episode of Licit Live, where we take you on a journey across the country, checking out shop owners, artists, and industry influencers. Today, Dustin Kava and I will break down my last 2 weekends checking out cannabis conventions in both Ohio and Maine. And I'll tell you, it was quite the difference, Dustin. Today, you're graciously, able to host us in your home state of Ohio, where we just got done doing the convention. And how do you feel, about having that type of convention right close to you, in your home state? Finally.
Oh, well, the finally is a big factor. I mean, I could definitely remember being scared to even say certain words within this state, let alone going to a convention of any capacity. It's certainly no MJ BizCon in Vegas, but it definitely gives real insight into the grassroots nature of Ohio's, cannabis industry.
Funny you say grassroots. Checking out the Maine convention compared to the Ohio convention, I definitely felt like there was a big difference. Maine's got a lot more licenses, so it felt a more like personable experience. When I went to Ohio, it seemed like a lot of the big players were corporate big dogs, and actually got a chance to sit at a panel, with 4 of the top executives for Ohio. And I found it pretty interesting, the way they were talking about the industry, the way they were perceiving it, and the difference of just coming from Maine, and seeing the big differences there. How do you feel about Ohio's, program and their future?
Ohio gives you a real opportunity to look into an industry that is highly regulated. I mean, you obviously hear cannabis, so you're thinking highly regulated in the sense of every state that has cannabis is highly regulated. But what I'm talking about is a state with a medical capacity, but with very limited choices on how you can consume. Specifically, you have to vape it. It has to in no way have any combustion mechanism. The device you use cannot have flame to material. There has to be some separation between the two, heating element and material, plant matter. And so with that being said, it gives you this, again, a window into what it could be like if we went federally legal and we decided to go about it a strict nature. And so I think it has a viable place within our country right now to see.
Yeah, talking about strict, laws. One thing I really noticed when I was in Maine is the difference between the medical program and the recreational program. In Maine, you would think that a medical program would be a little bit more strict, but it's actually the opposite. So in Maine, it's extremely hard to get the rec license, and apparently the growers are all saying that the regulations and how they have to grow to meet those requirements for Maine are so much harder that everybody ends up staying in the medical scene.
When you hear that, what do you think the actual barrier is then? What do you think is causing it to be that much more difficult?
I mean, one of the things they said that pretty much anybody operating in the grow facility after a certain amount of weeks has pretty much have to wear a hazmat suit. The plant cannot come in contact with human skin, period, or it's done. They have to throw out the entire product. They said
that's on the recreational side?
On the recreational side.
But not on the medical side.
Not on the medical side. And that's something interesting to think about. I was actually blown away by that. And the fact that, and somebody brought up the testing, how a lot of the product that's being tested in Massachusetts is testing high for a lot of more chemicals because, in a big grow, if one plant gets sick, then you have to treat all the plants. And so they're not having as much of an issue with that in Maine because they have so many small that it's making a big difference. So it's actually, providing a much higher quality product. A lot of people are in testing like, don't smoke anything from Mass right now because everything up there is, got chemicals where they've had to treat stuff from the large grows.
I mean, we can say that, but when I go into a dispensary in Michigan, I sign a waiver that says none of this material has been tested. or I come from a side where, you know, we personally have, we have other people within the industry who have dealt with labs and have had the offer to have their product test higher should they give them a little bit more money, or have their product test without chemicals should there be a higher cost. You know, so we've seen a lot of really gray area talk, and I'm not sure what exactly the situation is. When I think of a state, I want to say that it would be easier to link and regulate a patient with their card, where I have to scan their card in addition to their license, and that extra tracking mechanism should mean a difficult time as a patient navigating it. Whereas recreational doesn't have that extra scan of the card, doesn't have that extra barrier, but yet it's that much harder to get product. It just seems a bit counterintuitive, you know, for the market.
You know, one of the things you're just mentioning, you know, is that record. And I noticed today at the Ohio convention, I don't think we saw any seed to sale processors. Not one person that was out there promoting the tracking from seed to sale. Do you remember anybody there today?
No. And it's hard because it takes millions of dollars to develop a system, and yet you're being told that every state has a different system, a different set of rules, a different reason for it, a different governing body that oversees it even. And so if I think I want to develop software, I want to develop software that has the most amount of users that it can use. I want to make the most amount of money that I can. And so if I'm being told, oh, no, you got to develop this software, but it only can be marketed to the state of Ohio, and I only have 40 cultivators in this state, gosh, I have only 40 customers to do this tracking with. Whereas Oklahoma, I have 4,000 customers to do the tracking with in terms of licenses.
9,000 or 4,000?
4,000. Yeah. When you consider that a state the size of California, I think they only have like 2,500 licenses. So when you look at 4,000 in Oklahoma, and the program is literally in its infancy, it's a baby program. It's 2 years in, and they don't even know they've only checked 3% of the facilities. But yet, yeah, I think it's just incredible to see a lack of barrier there. There, it's $40. You get your recreational card, and you can do whatever you need, or your medical card.
Yeah, I was just in Oklahoma, about a month ago, and it was a very different scene. I mean, just going everywhere, and, you know, same thing with Maine. So a lot of the dispensaries I've been to dispensaries in probably 10 different states now, or more than that. I lost
No way. I
counting.
think while I've been on the phone with you, passing through dispensaries, I can at least name about at least 13 states that I've seen you or heard you getting something in. And that equates to over 100 fucking dispensaries. You know, state number doesn't mean anything when you are stopping at 6 shops within that town to get a feel for the industry. So you've probably been in more dispensaries than most. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, so when I went to Maine, and it was almost like going into a 7-Eleven. Like, there was no guard at the door. There was no extra security. Like, you walked in and, like, you didn't even show your ID till you're up at the counter getting ready to buy something. And there was no security guard. There was no double doors. You know, there was a couple places that had double doors, but whatnot. But it literally, you just walked up to the door, walked in, and it was just sitting there on the counter ready. Like, that seems so much more laxed than something where I go up and there's an armed guard sitting at the door waiting to let me in. Like, you know, it was definitely a more personable experience, and that I really appreciated. You know, I went to check out the dispensaries up there, and a lot of them had American Glass, and I was very surprised about that, because traveling throughout the country, most of the dispensaries I've been to have been corporate, and they don't care about the American Glass. I mean, they're giving it away. They've got Chinese
it's a price
imports
point at every turn, and even if it's not a price point, it's a promotional thing that is not meant. It's for a tourist that's going to throw it away before they ever even leave the state. You know, so they don't see the device as important as the product that they carry, and that's a really funny thing when it comes to scaling. It's like you're You're scaling out of the people who legitimately built your business.
The content producers.
Yes, these content. Well, and if you are so concerned about the quality of the product you carry in your store, but yet fundamentally miss the point of the dangers of what could be when you carry the wrong type of device from the wrong country, or with lead-based paints on the inside, or some crazy situation that you would be, we talked about testing 10 minutes ago. It's like, oh, there's chemicals in this thing in my cannabis, and that's complete shit. But no one says, oh, there's chemicals in my pipe, or there's something wrong with this device, and I haven't actually thought of that.
So one of the things that I heard in Massachusetts is that if it fails for testing, for that you can smoke out of it, you can still run it and make concentrates out of it. And that makes it even worse. So if it fails for testing, and then you're going to concentrate the chemicals and make it even worse. They're saying, I mean, they're really dealing with some problems, the scalability problems, because of the way they did their licenses and how many limited grows they have. And so I'm definitely starting to see that firsthand. And it's something interesting. And I brought it up today, in front of the other executives. Like I couldn't help but ask, where some of these companies feel that, too big is too big. Where can we find that balance between growing too many plants, and not growing enough? Because if you contaminate one, you're contaminating all of them.
I always wondered about that sustainability in terms of having redundancy with your grow. So I was always surprised at the lack of modular rooms, at the lack of this isolation where you could shut down a whole room, you could spray the shit out of it, kill everything in it, and then leave it closed for a month. And only have 4% of your operation go down. Now, clearly that as you scale, they are doing that. I mean, you think about a grow somewhere and they have 25 greenhouses. Well, in some regards, there's some redundancy to each greenhouse. And at that scale, it makes sense to have that many plants in certain regards. But I am curious that's not the only state that I've seen with mold. So you're going to be noticing that prevalent in a lot of, especially new states with new cultivation operations who have not came into themselves yet. They don't even know who they are, or they hired a head grow and he turned out to not know as much as he said he did. And so,
yeah, I mean, I was just out in Oklahoma and they're like, yeah, we invited these growers out here and they're coming out and they know everything. And then they start growing these new environments and they're like, there's a lot of different bugs here, like bugs we've never encountered before. And once you introduce one new thing, everything gets switched up. And so that's something that, talking about growing in different places, that was one of the things that definitely came up in Oklahoma because they are so new. They exploded so fast that they really have, a huge learning curve, because there wasn't a lot of grows before 2019, in Oklahoma. I mean,
no, when you can have a grow at the end of a suburban development because of the way the zoning laws are, and you're not so tied to this street on this city in this part of the state. And like, you have that fluidity of where you can be. Yes, I can see how that could be like that. I could see how they're now growing in really a vast, there's 4,000 licenses of different kinds. So can you imagine if they're not designated to a certain spot of the state, just the differences in environment? You can have very wet ones. It's crazy. It really is crazy. And you're seeing different building types and different ways and cost-effective ways of doing this too. I mean, there's no regulation with how you can do it. There's very little laws with how it has to be set up out there. So I think we are getting to see not just a Wild West of it, but a true organic invention of the way an industry could be out there. I think it's going to lead the state in innovation just because of that lack of regulation.
I mean, they brought it up today. I mean, it's, I've heard a couple people say that Oklahoma itself is single-handedly crashing the world's weed market. I mean, they're growing that many plants out there and that much that they're talking pounds for $200. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous.
It's certainly not sustainable in certain regards. But again, that doesn't mean that there's not a place for a craft style product. There is always a place for multi-state MSOs that only care about quantity and only care about price point being low. And there is definitely an argument for someone who spends 100 times more hours on the product and thus demands a much, much higher, if not 100 times higher price. And so, this market is large enough that they all have a place. Oklahoma just pumping out massive amounts of cannabis is not, even if they are single-handedly bringing down the price, they're not taking away anything. The black market is still thriving. The legitimate regulated market is still thriving. They're both not decreasing, which means as more medical patients are coming into the fold, there's not being a decrease in black market users. They are both rising. When they say the cannabis industry is going to gain double the amount of sales in the next 5 to 10 years, that also means the black market sales are going to double as well. It's not an if or. So to me, there's a place for them all. Fuck them. Let them grow at $200 pounds. I have a place for that. Me rolling up my blunts all day, I'm going to use that weed instead of my craft weed. And I don't think the legacy market is going to go anywhere. It's one of those things that's always going to be around. You're always going to have somebody that wants to grow some stuff and give it to their friends. I mean, it's going to be always around and always going to happen. When it first went legal, I'm sure you had a lot of bootleggers from Prohibition, still doing it, but you really don't see that as much anymore in a regulated industry. As far as, you do have some craft brew stuff that still happens, but the majority of everything is a large regulated, distribution company now. And so that was one of the arguments that the executives tried to make. If we continue down this road and continue to do this, that legacy market will start to decline because people, the ease of access, the price gets better, the product gets better. And that was another thing. But do you think that there is how can it ever beat the black market when there's not the 30% tax on it, or when you don't have to have the packaging requirements, you don't have to spend the money on the testing, you don't have to do any of the things that they are doing that legitimately takes away from their profit? How can they compete? The black market, if they're able to grow a pound for $200 in Oklahoma, wouldn't a black market pound be even cheaper?
I mean, that is the black market pound, or the legacy market pound, price is that $200. I mean, that is when those guys that are operating in legal states and are operating legally, get put up against the wall, they make those hard decisions to go out there and sell illegally to these other people, and that creating that legacy market. So, as we see expansion and we see more and more options and more licenses issued, we're also going to see that legacy market expand and more products. But at the same time, there's got to be a bubble. You don't see as much of that today, that somebody wants to distribute some beer, some moonshine. Yes, that market's still there, but it's so minuscule compared to, everything else. Because, unless you're around West Virginia.
True. But again, think about, when I think of the difference between a mom and pop boutique style shop and the way they look at their employees and the way I look at sustainability of an industry, their turnover rate is fucking substantially lower than what a large MSO is going to be. And so when I think about what betters the community, what brings more money and keeps more money within the town, what provides more opportunity for ancillary businesses, again, within a community, I think of these boutique style shops. And so to me, yes, I think there's obviously going to be a large, you're already seeing it with the amount of vertical integration happening in the industry, the amount of brands being bought up, or the average lifespan of a license owner is like 3 to 4 years in our country right now. Meaning not like they're going to die, meaning that they exit the company within 4 years. They sell out their license to another operation. And You've witnessed it, and even a lot of those cases, they don't even last a year. Sometimes they only have to keep the license for a year before they can sell it. And at that point, the license is already worth $1 million just because there's only 14 of them within the state or 25 of them within the state. And so it's this fucking lottery that it like, they didn't even care about growing to begin with. All they knew was that we're going to attempt to get this license. And if we get it, we're just going to fucking sell it to an MSO. So again, what value are these companies providing for the community? How are they growing and bringing in the fold those people who literally went to prison for them?
Okay, so that was one of the things. When I was up in Maine, I had a couple people share how much they're paying some of these people. You know, everybody at multiple dispensaries were getting $40 an hour and up.
Unbelievable.
There's no one getting less than $40
You go to Michigan, you're getting less than 13 or 16 at the very most. You go to Ohio, the average cost or price is about $14 to $16. And that's with fucking education and some legitimate training, you know? And that's not enough for a 1-bedroom apartment with a car and car insurance and a phone and food. And you can't afford it in my state. So $40 is a livable wage. It's a wage. It's a wage that you probably could have a family on, which means that your turnover rate in that company should be substantially lower. Oh, yeah. Now, are their taxes that much higher? So that, you know, what are the taxes? You know, how does that equal out at the end of the day for a lot of those up there? And are they really getting the $40 an hour?
I mean, that's something to look into. I was actually blown away. I mean, I went into a smoke shop and, you know, one of the managers was getting $35 an hour. And I was like, wow. Wow.
Yes. I know that my goal owning a retail store was to get my employees to make that much. But I also know the 6,000 hours of thought that were put into that attempt and just how hard it really was. Just how hard to convince your customers that maybe we have to charge more for this thing, or maybe this process has to be more streamlined in order to save time so I can give the money to my employees. I think it's a powerful thing when an industry decides to pay the supporting staff a conducive wage, a living wage.
I think that's, you know, part of the future of getting away from that legacy market is having those people that, you know, want to support a company. They're like, hey, these guys are paying a living wage and they're competitively priced. You know, not only am I getting a quality product that I know has been tested, I know there's been met a lot of regulations, but they're also feeding their families. They're feeding, you know, it's not just one guy getting paid at the end of the day. It's like they built a bigger table in Maine, is how I look at it. Is, you know, there's more people eating off of this industry in Maine than I see eating off the industry in Ohio.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think there's only a couple states that I would want to say are worse in that regard than Ohio, but there's not many when you consider just how many states have legislation. It's unbelievable. And again, it's really a funny thing when you think about that difference in thought about the plant as you expand the country, just going one state over or 2 hours across the border. And there's just a whole different mindset, a whole different thing. At what point do you think that we're going to stay on a state to state level with that? And at what point do you think things are going to be simplified because there are so many multi-state operators? There's going to be a need to transfer products state to state and to do certain parts of your operation not within some boundary.
I mean, I kind of like the idea that they're letting each state try different models, because we're going to, you know, be able, it's easier than coming out and saying, hey, this is how we're doing it, and then we got to change it for everybody a little by little. You know, they can try totally different models in different states. And then so when we do actually decide on a plan that are standard that we can adapt in all states, I think it's going to be a lot more inclusive and efficient than what it would be if we would have just gone blanket all in, jump off the cliff. You know, this is how we're going to do it.
So then what do you think is better when it comes to the supporting employees in the industry? Do you think that you would rather see these companies participate in charity events and donate their money to certain causes? Or do you think that you would see a bigger growth had they say, taken a passion from one of their employees, invested in them to start their own operation, and then became their first customer of some kind. You know, like there's,
you know, my personal background. I want as many people to own businesses as possible. No one works for me, right? As my operation has grown and everybody's, you know, how many guys you got? And I'm like, oh, I got 7 guys that work with me, you know, and no one works for me. And so I like that idea of some of the larger companies having little finger companies go out there in the ancillary chain and helping grow, because there's a lot of people who want to get into this industry that don't have the business experience. And so when they jump in, having that parent company could help them out and be very beneficial to help use the resources, the network, the, you know, everything that goes along with being a corporate company. But then you have a personal owner, you know, that's going out there putting a personal touch on it, putting, you know, their own innovation, because we understand how it's hard to innovate in a boardroom.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You got to have a lot of people agreeing.
Yeah. And it's, and they're looking at it from a different perspective that isn't necessarily falling in line with your vision. So there is something to be said about the accountant thinking fiscally about the company. And there's something to be said about an owner who says, no, this risk is fundamentally important to the brand and we must take it. And so the accountant and the owner are going to kind of butt heads in that regard. The accountant's going to say, we should stash this for a rainy day. And the owner's going to say, no, now's the time to reinvest it. We need to do this next step because it's important. And yes, I can see the board. It is like that. I think of like, I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it done. Amazon has done just that. You think of Amazon and they're this huge behemoth coming in and literally undercutting and undermining at every turn almost everybody within any industry. But then you look at the way they bought Zappos, and they gave Zappos's owner and that entire company structure full autonomy to operate as an independent entity, just with support structure from Amazon. When Zappos needed help with certain development things, they would turn to Amazon. If they needed certain, you know, like communication or HR or whatever the hell the resource was, they could call their big daddy and be like, do you have an operation for us to copy here? Do you have some type of thing to facilitate here? And they did. And Zappos continued to dominate their market, even with ownership of Amazon. So it can happen in this industry. It can happen in industry in general, and I'm not scared, and I don't think that there's any reason why it can't happen in the cannabis industry. So there's a place, again, there's a place for them all. I want to see the cashier go to an owner of some kind. I want to see the cashier who has the passion for videography of some kind to turn into the marketing company that produces the content for the cannabis company that they started out with behind the counter, but make their own schedule, set their own wage, and have their own employees to help facilitate this. And I want to see us build together, not necessarily keep building in our isolated silos trying to outdo each other, but there is so much that we can learn and pull from each other.
Yeah, it's, you know, and that's what I really taken from going to these 2 conventions, is what I can take from, you know, the Maine, and what I can take from Ohio, and what I can take for, you know, Vegas conventions, is some of those connections and those people are going to be the most invaluable. If you say in business, what is your number one asset?
It's your network.
It's your network and your people. Like your people are, you know, the number one. And so when you get, that's my biggest concern with these big companies, is they don't really care about that little guy. You know, they don't really care. It's, at the end of the day, it's, you know, stockholders and financial reports.
But they say stakeholders. And so when your company motto, when your company voice says to empower all your stakeholders, they're not just talking about their customers. They're talking about the board members. They're talking about everyone included, and not every decision affects everyone equally, every stakeholder equally. And so I hear the word stakeholder thrown out in these these companies at a much larger rate. And sometimes when I hear that word, I say, you don't even mean customers anymore. You actually just mean shareholders, like you just said. And fuck, man, I got to interrupt this because I got to fucking say, as an owner of a business, you fucking took the risk. You put the millions of dollars up on the line. You took the damn risk. So you deserve it. You deserve the money. You deserve to take it and walk. Your employees are not taking the risk at the same level. They don't have the millions of dollars up. Should your company go out of business, they can go next door to a new company. So in certain regards, the owner still deserves those stakeholders, those investors still deserve a lot of the voice that they get, even though the customers are what's building the brand. So I have that duality in me that says I have to showcase and say, as me, the customer advocate, 90% of the time against brands, I still understand what it means to have your stakeholders be number one. You know, like,
is Curaleaf an IPO? Do they have stakeholders?
I'm not sure if they're publicly traded, but I do know that it is, especially the way they have bought up other brands. You have a lot of different pockets of ownership of like shares that have, equity value that is given out and dispersed in a different way. So I could say, yes, there has to be.
This is one of the things I noticed when I was leaving the New England conference in Portland. There was a guy standing out the end and had a big sign up and it said, "Why is the New England Cannabis Convention in East Can taking money from Curaleaf?" I mean, just stood there for hours, with a thing above his head. And I was kind of, taken back by that. And like, I wanted to know his story of like, why are you standing there, trying to bring attention to the fact that this organization took money from this other organization? And so that's something I'd like to discuss and see what your opinion is.
Outside of their why, because I'm really not sure, but I have seen Curaleaf in the news a lot. I think they just had a lease back. I think they just leased back the building that they had bought a year and a half ago and built out. I think they had to sell the building and now are leasing it monthly or something like that. They have never had the greatest track record with treating the employees in the way they should. But again, they scaled fast. So their concepts, again, always seemed like they were acquisition based as opposed to quality based. Like, again, it was like, how can we acquire the most amount of space and retainership in as much states as we can right now while it's the most difficult time? I'm not sure they ever thought about, the why. And I'm not sure that man standing outside holding a sign is going to make a damn difference because people aren't stopping buying their product right now. As much as I believe we vote with our wallet, price point matters. And if Curaleaf comes in at $25 a tenth in Ohio, when others are at $35 or $45, I'm not sure that person's going to give a damn whether they were bad to their employees. And I'm not sure that, obviously some will, but they're going to still operate. They're not going to lose their business over them doing something wrong like that. They're too large and their PR is too damn good. Like, how long do you have millions of dollars?
Let's talk image, and that's the thing that we were talking, I was assuming this guy's sign was to affect the image of both the Cannabis Convention and Curaleaf. And so how important do you think it is for a dispensary to establish their image, and then not only establish their image, but I see a lot of them want to have this clean new age look and this upbeat, classy look to it. And then in other states, they'll go in there and put imports on their shelves and just drive that image down because there's no one in the company that knows that perception is there for the user because they're just not aware of it. And so I was at a place in Maine, right?
Yeah.
And I texted you and I was like, this is the place we do not want to be. Like, this is the epitome of like, no, It was a smoker's haven, right?
Yeah.
Total import shop right off the side. I mean, like clean, like
Well, and
stuff with imports. I mean, 4 or 5 deep on the wall, all the way around, 2,000 square feet of imports, and then it just looked messy. It looked junky, but I mean, it wasn't. It was just the way they ran their business. And then they had this dispensary on the side. It was like 2 totally different businesses, but they were like, "Oh, we're the same. We're the same." Like this is
Michigan has a lot of that too. Vegas, I didn't get that. I felt a lot. Every one of them put a lot of detail and money into the image in Vegas. In Ohio, there isn't there. I wonder if it's a larger recreational scene that allows that image to happen. Like in Ohio, how about in Bible Belt states? Are you noticing the difference of that type of scenario from Bible Belt states to a more progressive state? Because a Bible Belt state has a lot more people to convince that it's all right, that it's safe. There's a lot more reefer madness going on.
Well, I'm trying to think of like Bible states that have recreational right now. Like, would you consider? I mean, Illinois is that's not going to be in a Bible state. Like,
no, yeah, that's a good point. Like recreational,
yeah, there's no recreational, real dispensaries in Bible states.
But I do see not one shitty looking dispensary in the state of Ohio. And part of it is because of how strict that program is and how much work they had to do to convince the state that it was even necessary. It's almost like when the state's like, we love cannabis, then the shop owner is like, I don't need to care what I look like because my state loves cannabis. But when your state is like, I hate cannabis, but we're going to allow it, then they're like, we need to make this crystal clear image and have every detail spot on because I can't give them some reason to stop my license. Which, again, perception, having fake plants and some fucking pallet wood behind you does not mean your store looks any nicer than anything else. It's this common thing of like, let's throw the same fake plants, the same type of cases, the same type of urban, modern, contemporary feel. And there's a fucking lot more to patience than just that, And yeah, it's so weird when I think about that now. Like there is the really ugly shops, and then you have the other ones which all look exactly the same. So there's no middle ground. There's no. It's a strange phenomenon for me to think about that statewide.
So going back to the Ohio convention today, what did you think about the vendor list and who actually showed up for that convention? Because it seemed to me to be a lot more ancillary chains than I saw, in Maine. In Maine, there was 3 or 4 people that had glass in Maine. And the funny thing was every booth there looked organized until I came up to a booth that sold import glass and they were unorganized. I mean, it was the only booths that were organized through the whole convention. And that really, was a noticeable thing. We came today to Ohio, and even though the corporate, structure is here, and it seems like it's a pay-to-play big boys kind of game, there were a few more, ancillary product chains and stores that were trying to be there. Like I saw more American Glass at the convention today than I did in Maine. I think there was only one person that had imports today.
Yeah.
I think everybody else had American Glass. And so that's, something funny to me to see in one state where they hold a convention and they have a couple vendors with imports and all the shops have, most of the dispensaries have, American Glass. And then you go to another state where it's corporate.
Yeah, there are no pipes because you can't even smoke. And yet there's more American Glass at the convention. That is a really funny, that's extremely funny.
Yeah.
It just feels like there's no competition in Ohio. I just get this perception that like the market is so much smaller here. It's just, it's so much smaller in Ohio. I can't think of any other state that has a smaller market right now, like even like the tiny states, I still feel like Connecticut is fucking, like when I think about per capita, like a dispensary serving how many dispensaries per how many people. Connecticut and all these little states are killing us. And so
one of the executives today said his numbers he threw out. He said that he thought the state of Ohio could support about 250 to 300 medical dispensaries alone. He said that that's where they felt that the medical scene in just Ohio could, be.
And there's only plans for, I think that we're going to get up to finally now, I think it's going from 75 to like 126 or something in licenses for my state, just on the dispensaries. So if it could support 300, we're talking about now doubling that. It took us 4 years to get to that spot. 5 years. Our program is now, outside of the day one it opening, the program has been over like 6 years old or something.
When they're also saying that the Ohio medical patients numbers have not increased. They said it's pretty much stayed stagnant for the last year or so because of the price that it is to renew your medical license, the price of the product here.
How difficult it is just to get the damn card to begin with. And the fact that Michigan is 2 hours north and the product is 1/5 of the cost. So, and they accept medical patients. And so Ohio had the most craziest numbers I'd ever seen, which was how many registered patients who had never purchased a product in Ohio. It had the highest numbers out of any state I'd ever seen so far. And that's just insane that they will have the card so that they can have the medicine in their house or have access to it in their trunk, but they will not fundamentally buy it from Ohio program because of cost. Just the fact that you have to buy it in a 1/10 is fucked up. Everywhere else in the world, it's an eighth, quartered, half ounce. It makes fucking sense. Having it be in 1/10 adds an extra 2 price points on every single ounce. It's $35 a 1/10 here, which means at the end of the ounce, I have to pay $35 times 10. It's a $350 ounce when I could have normally paid $275 or something like that. And that's a hard justification when they're the only ones in the country doing that. And again, they can drive to Michigan and get the daily allotments in Michigan. Again, that's another thing. We have daily allotments. Our daily allotments are based on the amount you're buying in, which sounds like that makes sense, right? You would think that if I bought a half, it would take more amount of my days in a prescription than if I bought a 1/10. But in a lot of ways, especially early on in Ohio's system, if I bought 2 1/10s, it sometimes took away 10 or 15 of my days. But if I bought a half in one package, it would only take away 2 of my days. Same thing. I smoke about a gram of oil a week. My prescription allotment in Ohio allows me to get a gram a day. I'm only allowed a 1/10 for 2 days, and that's not even a full day of smoking for me. But I can have a gram of oil, which is a week's worth of material, every single day. Their numbers don't make sense. The price points don't make sense. The availability doesn't make sense. The fact I can't combust or use it exactly in the way I want doesn't make sense. Ohio's a very difficult state.
I heard that the legislations, they produced or introduced a bill that was extremely similar to Michigan's policy. Do you think that Ohio's got a chance for that, or
certainly not in this upcoming election? I think Ohio has also proven that it has never mattered. Our last initiative here, the way they worded it on our ballot was so fucked up and so confusing, and it opened the door for our state officials to make the final say. So if I can remember correctly, there was 2 separate initiatives on our ballot originally for this medical. The first one was like really worded weird of like, do you want a cannabis program in the state of Ohio? Okay, so it was like, do you want this type of thing? And then a secondary question was, do you want this program? And they worded the program in such a way that no one wanted that program because it was so limited. It was like you weren't going to have certain, you were not going to have anything that we fought for. But what happened with our ballot was by us saying no to that initiative, it actually gave into effect the governor's choice to write any bill he wanted. And then he rewrote the medical law, put his own initiative in. And within X amount of months, there was a different bill with a whole separate set of regulations that we never even voted on. And so it put the sour taste in my mouth that said it's irrelevant. I don't even fucking care what my state representative is saying right now, because the minute our vote is over and the minute that it's worded wrong, they're just going to change the damn thing. So I don't feel positive about Ohio's progression. I feel a lot more positive with what I see in states like PA, with what I see Illinois is trying to push for and working towards. Even states like Kentucky, I feel like when they start coming along, they're going to be even more progressive than Ohio, which is a funny thing.
Kentucky was one of those places that 10 years ago, like 10 pounds was a misdemeanor. It was a really weird place.
Yeah, well, and the Commonwealth allowed them to do that. You know, that different. I mean, in Virginia, it's the Commonwealth as well, right? And so they got to kind of set that tone to we are regulating ourselves as a whole differently than even you guys are. So that also means laws like that can be different, you know, and it's powerful. I think it's there. What do you think states that have a high protection for its hemp farmers are going to inevitably have a high protection for their cannabis farmer, their actual, you know, consumable, smokable flower farmers?
I don't really know. I mean, I know that a couple of the hemp farmers I know personally spoke very highly of what they thought was coming down the pike. And then when it actually came down the pike, it was a lot different than what they were expecting. So I don't really think there's as many protections as what that conversation originally started with. You know, I think there was a lot more for farmers, a lot more incentives like, hey, get into this now, lay the groundwork in this CBD, you know, and then later on we can make these transitions, these licenses. But now, from what I understand, it's like that doesn't matter if you have a CBD or if you can process this. Like that does not give you any leg up on being in the industry and being, and that bothers me is the fact that, you know, we have these people out there that have been on the forefront and have been trying to get ready for this and have been putting their work in, and then can be told, screw you, and like walk away.
Well, and that's another reason why these larger corporations have an easier time getting the licenses to begin with. If it costs me $100,000 for my lawyer to draw up the paperwork, make sure that all my operations are to the T what the state is looking for, then I pay an architect and an engineer to go through my plans and make sure that the building itself is fundamentally sound to do what we're planning to do with it. And then I go to my security personnel, and when I go and I spend all this money just getting clarification, and then you can again have a state say no. Or how about this? I have to choose the building that we want to put this in right now. I either have to own it, I have to lease it, I have to anything, and I have to have the building before I even file for the license, which means they can still turn me down, but I have a contract for my license and my lease that I'm now tied to. Or a city restriction could say, nope, we're not doing it there anymore. And so I've seen multi-state operators, big corporations are the only ones that I know that can rent this building in that city, rent this on this street. And then when it finally is allowed, they can say, yep, these three are the ones that are allowed. Let's fuck all the others.
You know, one of the things I heard up in Maine was the different localities that were shutting down or stopping dispensaries from opening up. And I had met somebody that had been taking the suit to them, had actually been suing the towns and winning and getting the dispensaries opened up in these towns that had previously said no.
Yes.
seeing that and seeing an individual person,
that gives so much hope.
Yes, it does. Like when I met him, I was like, he's like, yes, it is costing me money, but I am winning and I'm getting to open up these dispensaries. And it's nice to see that somebody in a small area and I heard it, like he started off as a cable guy. Like he was installing stuff.
That's how an industry should work, though. Like, to me, that is it. When you can bring that type of person into the fold and truly allow them to grow within your state, those are the people who keep the most amount of money in the state. They keep the profits in the town. I love that. To me, that's like, it makes me want to leave Ohio and say that's the market for me. That's a market that appreciates that possibility. That's the American dream right there.
I mean, like I said, it was the most relaxed market that I've been to yet. And I've been to a lot of them. Every time I was in Colorado 8 days after it went legal, I was in Massachusetts the day it went legal. I've been traveling around and visiting those different places. So to see that and see that progression and see how the little guy can make a difference is in a place where they have that balance, so going from seeing Oklahoma to going to Maine and then going to Ohio, it's like three different things. And so you have Oklahoma on one side and then you have Ohio on the other side. And then you kind of got Maine mixed in the middle a little bit,
Well, and Florida's like, gosh, I think Florida reminds me that they're like tincture. They started out, I think they started out tinctures only.
Yeah. I think down there, like there for a while, like everything you had to vape it, or I think you might still have to vape it. And they were selling dry herb inside these vape cartridges. And everybody's just going home and ripping up the vape cartridges and smoking herb. And it's like, people are always going to get around it. It's why can't we tailor it to, the individual user? And that was one thing that they, brought up today in one of the seminars is, tailoring the medicine to the individual user and there not being a standard because everything's just a little bit different, and one of the doctors described it as, if you go to the grocery store and you pick up a bag of grapes that could be from the same grape, they could be everything same. But if you go to count them, depends on the size of the grape, you can't just say, hey, you get 10 grapes today because you might get some small grapes or big grapes. It's a big difference.
Or that just because it's the same type of grape that it has, that it's the same.
Yeah.
Different soil, different conditions, different lighting, different chemicals that they use on the pesticides with it. Everything matters. And the strain that the same company grows this month could be vastly different than what they grow the next month of the same strain. And so, yes, I think that part of that individuality of like a patient experience, catering to that patient, is just part of that plant's nuance. It's part of how much differently the genetics are and the difference in it is when you factor in the 200 variables that there really are.
All right, before we wrap up, let's think about now that we've gone to, or we both went to the Ohio one, and I went to the Maine one. Let's start with Ohio. If you were going to do the same event that we just went to next year, what are a couple things that you would improve on that you'd like to see changed by next year?
I think that there needs to be more donation of time from industry professionals to help these ancillary businesses start up. Lawyers there to answer legal questions, legitimate legal questions, our consultation sessions to facilitate the movement, almost like a score, for small business. There needs to be an entity that supports a lot of these individuals because a lot of them go in alone and a lot of them shouldn't have to feel alone in the industry.
That's what I felt that Maine did different than Ohio. When we went to the seminars in Maine, it was more of a Q&A with lawyers, with accountants, with they had an online business marketing seminar. They had a seminar on how to create a cannabis proposal. They had different self-help seminars for the individual, business. And
Yes.
so that's something that I really enjoyed seeing. And I did not see, yes, they had, seminars and classes today and panels, but it was just a couple people up there talking. And it just seemed like it was the doctor, I did, get more out of her, talk than I thought I was. But when the executives were up there, it was just a lot of noise, it seemed like, and so there was no one-on-one conversations. There was no, like you said, with the lawyers, asking questions. And like I went to one talking about how to set up a nonprofit and how to set up, corporations. And like they were really doing that and how to make a business plan in the cannabis industry. That was what was happening in Maine,
Because
and that was not happening here.
Most of the people that are going to these conventions are not fucking kids who smoke weed. They're not like how about this? Yes, there are kids. Everybody there smokes weed. Okay. What I'm saying is these are people who want to enter the industry. They are going there to really see what is out there, to really see how they can find their place in it. They're not going there they're not necessarily going there to be convinced of anything per se. I think they've known, they've been smoking for 20 years. They either want education, they want some extra guidelines and support, or they just want to see what's out there and if their business idea is being done in the industry. I just don't.
I think it's a big thing of them wanting to communicate. So in Maine, they've been able to have this conversation for a lot longer.
Okay.
In Ohio, you're still having to mind your P's and Q's to even have some of these conversations, and it's a lot of get around. So I think that's one of the big things. There was a big demographic difference in who visited the convention in Ohio compared to who was in Maine. It was, more individuals as opposed to more businesses coming to,
or even
Ohio.
like the Cannabis Cup, same way. More individuals going there to experience the Cannabis Cup as it is, to smoke weed there. That's what it is. But you don't see the same types of processing and ancillary companies, credit card processors, accountants, t-shirt, you're not seeing that type of backup at the places like the Cannabis Cup, because again, the people there are going to buy weed and to smoke it there. They're not going there to get a business card to come home and start a cannabis accounting firm, or call the accountant to do the thing. It's a different game, but I think it's impressive when you do have that freedom for that long. Maine having that experience for these couple years, you can see the difference. Even just the way I hear you talk about it, the difference is night and day. It's a very visual from the moment you walk in.
100%. I mean, it wasn't that one convention was business to business and the other one was business to customer. It was both, but it was the type of business and the type of customer. The type of customer that went to the Maine seemed to be more informed and tapped into the system. The customers that I saw in Ohio were just new to everything. They're starstruck, like, hey, this is awesome. You still had the fairies walking around and trying to, like, that part of the culture that doesn't even really,
exist when you really factor in dollar amounts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's, definitely one of the things that I directly saw the difference, and I would like to change. I would like to see the conversation and the education catch up in Ohio. And the only way they can do that is to loosen some of these regulations to make these conversations be able to happen.
I assure you, Maine, all the cultivators and dispensaries up there do not have to send their social post photo to the state to have it approved before they post it the way they do in Ohio.
I did not know that.
And in Ohio, their websites, every picture, every page has to be approved by the state before you can go live with it. That's crazy. After your lawyer saying, yes, according to your laws, I am cool. We should be fine. You're paying me $75,000 a year to make sure we're compliant. And yet I'm still sending it to the state and waiting 3 weeks to get the approval. And even down to the names, you are not allowed to name certain plants if they have a connotation that represents a certain feeling. Meaning, like, I am not allowed to name this shit
Dr. Feelgood.
Yes, or morning presence, or something like that. I can't say euphoric evening. I can't make any representation to it's going to do a certain thing at a certain time or with a certain reason. And yet green crack and grandma's ass cookies are allowed to be the names in my state, and those are approved, but yet, sunshine morning routine is not, and so yes, and yet I still have to send it and wait 3 weeks for approval. So yes, the difference in that voice, look at how much further they're able to progress when they're not waiting 3 weeks just to move one step. It's it's a night and day difference between the different industries. But again, I think it's amazing that you even got to be allowed to walk through the doors in Ohio. For some reason, I felt like unless you were a patient, like there would be some other barrier that would have prevented you from being there today, and there wasn't. And so shouts to Ohio for fucking navigating that, at least trying to navigate that right. I didn't see cops bothering anybody. I didn't see anything that should have made that convention just not feel like a normal convention, which it is. It's just a normal convention.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very big difference of what I expected coming into Ohio. I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I did look it up. I was like, can I get into this convention and not have a medical card? I went to a couple of I went to a lot of medical dispensaries when I was in Maine because that was the loosest regulations. There was a lot more medical dispensaries than were rec. And I got, I don't have a medical card, but I walked right into some of these dispensaries. And when they'd ask me, I'm like, hey, I'm just here for your glass. And they're like, oh, come on in. Like,
that will not happen in Ohio. You're scanning your prescription card before you even enter into the first locked door. And then you're getting into that locked door and you're scanning your card again and getting into a second locked door. And then they put your card into a system and then you're getting put into a third room where you could finally buy your shit.
And then you go to Maine and they have an open door policy.
With no security guard at the end, no iris scans to get me through the door and like biometric patient readers that I have to fucking navigate. It's like, it's amazing. Again, you being in the glass industry awards you and having 400 stores that your products are in nationwide really affords you the opportunity to get a real grasp on the nationwide industry, the current state of the industry. And so I think you sharing a lot of this with the viewer, is like, it's a powerful perspective because you really have been everywhere. And out of most people, even the ones within this industry, you've been to plenty more dispensaries than they could ever even name off of. They can, off their short list of fingers.
Yeah, it's something that I really enjoy having the take of now, having the experience and be able to walk into these places and size them up. And now I'm having different conversations with them. I'm having these advertisement conversations with them. I'm having these seed to sale conversations with these dispensary owners, and I'm having their bottleneck issues. And now I'm going to a dispensary. I'm like, what are your bottlenecks? Where are your roadblocks? Where are you seeing your growth, harm and potential? And so it's something that I like to share and continue to grow, because this industry is going to change. You know what? I'm going to say that it changed since we started this podcast.
I think that you can honestly say that 100%. And it's not going to stop. We still got plenty a decade to really come into their own as a nation with cannabis.
So if you want to continue to watch us and hear from us, talk about how the industry is evolving, talk about how our perception, where we see it going and what we hope for the industry. Like, subscribe, follow us, social media, Licit Live on Instagram, wayward.media for Dustin.
Yep. And thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you listening, and send us feedback on every one of those sites and places we just named. You can hit us up with a message. We'd love to hear from you.
Till the next time, another episode.